He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down into the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man, the dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. These old times.
That would have been such a funny cold open, right? And instead, now we just have a confusing one. Duo Stulti, dude, Titus. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. Yeah.
You show up, you ruin the cold open. Now you're talking over each other. Like, what is this?
This is 12:30 in the morning when neither of us record. We either record very, very late or at like 9 in the morning. So this is exactly the time when neither of us are actually on.
Yeah, I mean, I have my drum students are all on vacation for today, so I've got a totally free day. And I don't know what to do with myself. I don't have days off.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a professional in the podcasting space, I both don't have a real job and don't have days off. So I certainly know what you mean. Although I will say the two of you have the most busted recording schedule possible. I've been trying to get these two guys on, and it's like, well, we can do it at 9:30 on a Friday or at 7 in the morning. And I'm like, okay, guys, like, is there literally anything other than those two options? And so we're recording at noon on a Saturday.
Yeah, that's more my fault. Dune works a 9 to 5, but I, as a drum teacher, work from like, 2:30 p.m. to 9 or 10, depending on when I've got lessons booked. So I don't really get the luxury of a 9 to 5.
Well, so unlike most people, my job actually gets more intense around the Christmas season because I work with a lot of municipalities and they all do their reorganizations in January. So for the last month, I've been getting home at like 8:30 at night, pretty much every other day of the week. So yeah, our recording schedule is completely busted.
It's a really good thing that we're somewhat on top of things, because it would be such a disaster if it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of planning. I think our Google Doc is about 2-3 months in advance, and we sit down and always have like a very long conversation. I don't do this much planning for my actual job. Like, it's just our schedules are so busted. We need to, and because we're doing like in-depth historical stuff and having to read firsthand accounts, it's like, all right, who can read 300 pages of Procopius over the next week?
Yeah, which that'll be our life for the next 2 months.
So that actually brings us to an important point. What do you guys do on your podcast, and what is your podcast? A professional would have started with that, but as evidenced by my inability to schedule a stupid video call, I am not a professional.
Yeah, I'll take this one. We cover also. I mean, this started as an extension of late night conversations Dune and I would have after our weekly D&D games, where you would sit on Discord for several hours and talk about history. And this is actually, I mean, we've been talking about history for probably about a year and a half now, maybe. But since we were in the D&D thing, we were just talking more and more. And Dune was like, all right, time to make a podcast about this. So it's an extension of our ramblings. And we've kind of put together a basic schedule of topic categories that we follow, but it mainly centers around ancient and medieval history. Neither of us are super interested in modern history.
Yeah, we also feel like there's a lot of podcasts that kind of fill that in. Like I mean, it's been said a dozen times, but Thomas Sensen is just basically a college course in World War II and World War I and all before that. And that's basically taken up by a lot of right wingers. And we were talking about ancient history to the point where like there's not really anyone in this sphere that's kind of doing what we're doing. Like the rest of history is the big kind of ancient history podcast. A lot of people, not just ancient history, that people listen to. Tristan Hughes has one, but they're all very lib coded. And I like to think when we're looking at history, it's not necessarily from a political lens, but we give a lot more credence to the ancient authors. And when people see that a miracle happened, we're more want to actually believe that. And other things. Like there's a lot of moderns will say that, oh, the Vikings, if they made it to America, they only made it to like Newfoundland. But we did a whole episode on how they almost certainly got to Peru based on certain genetics in the area.
Based on a dog.
Several dogs. But yeah, it's the podcast is basically, it's sort of it should sound like two of your autistic friends late at night at a bar just rambling about some topic they've been researching.
And unfortunately, that's gotten us from, fortunately and unfortunately, but it's gotten us from like fun basic topic ideas to deep breakdowns of Justinian and having to go like looking through some of our.
Oh, hold on. That's not fair. That's not fair. Let's not forget. So the first episode started because
That's true.
There's this professor, Christopher Beckwith, who has a series of books, and one of them is called The Scythian Empire. And it's about how the Indian civilization, the Persian civilization, the Greek civilization, the Chinese are all actually descendant of this Supra-Scythian empire. We were talking about this after like one of our game sessions. And he was like, yeah, that sounds stupid. That's not real. So it's like, okay, well, we're going to start a podcast. So I got the book and I just highlighted quotes on quotes on quotes and just went back through this pretty complex etymological book and just basically definitively proves that the Scythians are the birth of all modern civilization.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring up primary sources because that's always the thing that I found interesting is the relative disdain for both primary sources and the people who read them. I don't know if you guys saw this, but there was a interaction on X going around with I think it's like Roman helmet guy.
Oh yeah, I think I did a tweet about this. Where he was like, I only read primary sources entirely uncritically or something like that and take them at their word. And I think I can't remember if I had sent the tweet, but I basically went, he's not wrong, but also because it's Roman helmet guy saying this, he's wrong because he's just so stupid that he's not of a high enough IQ to do that. Whereas Dune is, and I'm kind of there.
That's a respectable position, being just on like the break-even point of like the minimum viable IQ. It's sort of where I find myself in many places in life, history notwithstanding. So I sort of was primarily introduced to your guys' work on the TLE Halloween special, where you guys did an appearance there. I believe going over some ancient literature. Is that correct?
Yeah, high class. The golden ass.
Yeah, so it was this. We did part of the Halloween special on this book called The Golden Ass by Apollonius, and it's the only extant Roman kind of fiction book, I guess you would say.
Yeah, it's like a pulp novella.
Yeah, it's not written in verse. It's extremely well. Okay, so Titus and I are of different opinions. He thinks it's extremely crass. I think it's very intentionally so outwardly, but is very much more so a articulation of a certain mystery school that's developing in Rome at the time, which is the cult of Isis, which is derived from the Egyptian version because the Romans loved just traveling around and integrating all sorts of different gods. But yeah, so that book is it is deeply fascinating, and to what you're speaking about with primary sources, going back and being able to read, you get an idea of how different, in my opinion, you get an idea of how different these people were, what their conception of entertainment was, or all the different aspects of life. And we just did a whole big question and answer episode, and part of that was addressing whether or not like these ancient people are really the same as the moderns. And I think to answer that question, you need to go back and read the primary sources. And a lot of them aren't super difficult to access or read. Yeah, you get complex books like the Odyssey and the Iliad. I know it's much before, but that you need to analyze, or things like Thucydides, where he walks through very, very detailed the Peloponnesian War. But there's also like Tacitus's Germania is like 80 pages, and it's very easy to read. It's big text. You understand it. He explains everything that's going on. And it's the same thing with like Herodotus is the best of these primary text. Stop me if I'm going on, because I could just ramble about the glory of these. But like Herodotus, reading him as a primary text is is great because the entire first 3 books are him just giving ethnographic histories of different parts of the world. And even if they're not entirely accurate, which I tend to think they mostly are, you get an idea of like, okay, well, humans back then thought that to identify, like, the interesting thing about the Egyptians was that they had flying snakes and that they worship bulls. And you're like, well, that's not quite accurate, but it's just, I think it's fascinating to pick out what people are identifying in their world as important and then looking to today and saying, well, how are we different? Well, is our emphasis today different a good thing? Usually not. So, yeah, I love the primary sources of going back. And the podcast lets me just ramble to tell you about them.
Yeah, and it's inspired me to do a lot more primary source reading, which is something I didn't do nearly as much before we started the podcast. And now I've got the Gallic Wars, I've got some other stuff, and I'm reading through Procopius right now. But one thing that's also I think we do a good job of is taking the primary sources, because I think there is a middle ground. There is the modern concept of reading the primary sources and assuming that most of it's false. There is the right-wing reactionary way of every single thing written down is exactly true here. And not only is it true, but it fits my particular worldview. I think that the middle is you have to take these as more true than not, but then kind of look at it and go, well, what could this mean if it wasn't true? Without having to immediately dismiss it. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. I mean, we did that whole thing on the Trojan War and the Sea Peoples and stuff like that. And that's what a lot of it was, is taking it and then starting to read it a little more in depth and trying to pick out the symbolism behind certain things without giving some libtard explanation.
Yeah, I mean, like, so one of the common ones you'll come across when you're reading papers on like ancient historical sources is they'll reference the Cyropedia, which is a book written by Xenophon about Cyrus, the founder of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. And if you read the book, it's almost completely ahistorical. We have references from multiple other sources, from like the inscriptions of where certain battles were. It's almost completely made up. So if you read it as a history book, you're like, well, this is complete bullshit. And that's what the moderns have done. If you read a lot of papers, be like, well, the Cyropedia is just a load of crap. It's not useful, which is just completely untrue, because it's very, very useful for understanding how Xenophon was thinking of, why is he writing this? Well, it's to appeal to the Persians so they don't keep invading Greece or hiring mercenaries and then chasing them off because some contract went wrong. He's trying to basically build up relations between this country. Hence, what we get from Xenophon is probably what more accurate to what the Persians would have told themselves. So you get a lot of people saying, well, we don't have a ton of first-hand Persian sources. But that's what the Cyropedia is. It's a Greek guy, but he's basically telling the Persian story. So when you look at these primary sources, you can pull all these interesting things about them, like, and just get these myths we otherwise would have missed.
We did that in the our very first Worst of History episode. We're talking about Xerxes, where my big defense of him was not that he was good, but his portrayal as the, demonic god king from the East is really just to help foster Greek ethnogenesis, right? It's I think what I say, Xerxes was their George III. You look at George III and any source that's not an American kid learning about the American Revolution in 4th grade, and you go, yeah, he was all right. I mean, he was mediocre, nothing crazy, but he's got to be our Satan Hitler because that's part of the American founding myth.
Well, right. It is, almost, it becomes, a figure slips from being historical to sort of part of the civic state religion. And that's sort of the interesting thing about, like, when you look back to kind of in the ancient world, is that there's less of a self-delusion about having a civic state religion.
Yes.
Right? Like, obviously, you have like the Aeneid, right? You have, literally like a state-sponsored, explanation as to how Rome exists.
Yes, you've got Romulus and Remus, and then you've got the Iliad and the Odyssey are essentially that, but for Greece. et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure the Indians have some sort of thing, and the Chinese, which are not real, have some other not real sources that they try to draw on, but because they're not animals, they're insects. Animals has some racial undertones that I don't want to say, but they are insects, and we will be discussing this later. Anyway, yes, a lot of ancient cultures had these, it's civic state religion, and I've been calling it like a founding myth, right? They all have our nation came to be in this kind of fanciful telling of something that's not actually true, but it works, and it helps build our identity as what we are. And I think, what was it? What was it around Thanksgiving when Dune, you and I? No, it was before Halloween. We had a really long conversation about like this founding myth idea, because I was listening to the Martyr Made series on Zionism, and he was talking about how hard it is to build a nation. And that the standard human experience is tribe and clan and family. And breaking beyond that is way harder than a lot of people, especially in the West, think.
I think that's a very modern. I don't think that's right. I think that's a very modern. That might be too forceful. I respectfully disagree with you, my dear co-host, on that. I think a nation is a very, very natural evolution, and it's not actually a hard thing to get to. Maintaining it and keeping it is difficult, but I think it's a natural evolution. So we've brought this up a lot before. There's a guy, it's not Herodotus himself, but he cites him in the Peloponnesian War when the Macedonians there's a question of whether or not they're going to help the Greeks fight off the Persians. And the Macedonians are like, well, we can help you. We're Greeks. And all the Greeks look at each other and say, no, you're not Greeks, you're Macedonians. And there's not really, they're like, well, you speak with funny accents and you descend from different people. And the way that the guy in Histories puts it is that, look, a nation consists of shared language, shared culture, shared religion, and shared blood. And you guys don't have that. I think those 4 criteria are really good for actually saying what a nation is and avoiding the trap of falling into describing something as a nation state or referencing it. Yeah, I think that's too much of a 1800s, 1700s.
Yeah, I should have specified a more nation state. But even then, I think that you can still have a national concept, but getting people to believe in that more than their own personal ties is pretty difficult. Daryl Koo brings up that whole talking about modern Mediterranean countries, like in Italy, corruption is just rampant because people care about their family and their clan way more than they care about paying taxes to the state, which number one, based, number two, kind of shows that they don't have that loyalty to the idea.
No.
And also Italy is a fake nation anyway. So,
okay. This is a misunderstanding. When you're thinking of nation, you need to think of it as Tacitus describes it.
Okay.
In Germania, right? So you have the German nations. There's different tribes, right? But they all roughly have the shared language, shared blood, shared culture, and shared religion. Yeah, these guys might sacrifice goats on a Friday and these guys on a Sunday, but they're the same nation of people. I don't think that, yes, you have clan structures within that, but I think the nation is a natural abstraction on top of that. Like, you wouldn't say that, okay, well, no, this would be accurate. You wouldn't say that Sicilians are less Italian than people living in Milan, right? They speak the same language. Well, okay, obvious caveat.
Yeah, I would actually argue that no, the and this almost counters my own point, and this is why sometimes building a nation state out of several separate cultures is kind of a futile thing, because Sicilians would not see themselves the same as Milanese, and Milanese wouldn't even see the Sicilians as human.
That's irrelevant, though. That's irrelevant to whether or not the individual perceptions are relevant to whether or not they actually are something. We're different people, but they both had okay,
they don't share the same language, really. I mean, not really. Italian's a construct. The Sicilians spoke Sicilian. The Milanese spoke the dialect there. They didn't. They were separate things. And this is a longer thing. You know, Jay, how many times do you have people from a podcast come on and like agree as one united front? With me and Dune, we just start arguing. It's great. I love it.
Wait, we're on someone else's podcast.
The last time I had two co-hosts from a podcast on, they just both teamed up against a missing member of the podcast and called him gay for like an hour. And yeah, so I guess you could say that is unity, right? You know, just a united front against one of the other guys who's not there. So if you guys could invent a third co-host, and then we can just like belittle him, like sexually or socially. I think that's really the comfortable place for my podcast.
It's funny you say that because there's a literal, actual primary historical source that does that. The Historia Augusta is this beautiful primary source that is about 17% factual. And they have this other, it's a collection of writers. It's essentially it's TLE, but for like ancient Rome. And they have this extra writer that they keep dogging on. And we have no evidence of that writer ever existing. But throughout the entire book, they just go in on this guy. There's also the thing that it may just all be written by one author as well. There's it's one of my favorite historical texts ever. And that's one of the few ones where I'll go, everything in this is true. Because every emperor has an omen. Every emperor starts out with like, you know, on the eve of Emperor Maximinus Thrax's, you know, ascension, a cow gave birth to a calf with 3 heads and green spots. And you're like, wow, the auspices are great.
Well, actually, that's something I think we should get back to, is more augury. I think that, you know,
we have an augur on the show.
You do.
So my previous career, before I was an attorney, I was, there's an old bit on, I hate to keep referencing that, but old bit on TLE, which is they would occasionally bring up bird news. And there was a guy who every day for about a year would send them bird news collected around the internet. Is so much so he took on the title of augur, and that man is myself. I was really into bird symbology for a while, for about 3 months of my life in very early law school. And I was like, this is great. I'll send there. But I agree with you. If we need more augury, I think we should get back to it. It is, it's very entertaining. I think, Croesus of Lydia is the great, well, that's not really augury. That's Oracle of Delphi. But yeah, I don't have too many more opinions. I think reading the future is a good Christian practice we should continue to do.
Yeah, well, and I think that we really need to drill down to, you know, the essence of augury, if you will. Reading entrails, cool. Looking at flocks of birds, also cool. And, you know, in this kind of current era of you know, like so-called, you know, perversions like science or something like that, like that's boring. Like, entertain me. We really need
hold on.
You know,
I would say science is really interesting. And honestly, a dissection, like, you know, the dissections you do in school of like the frogs that are in the formaldehyde, that's them trying to bring back augury, but they don't know it because they're libtards.
Well, okay, so Genesis 8, the story of the Tower of Babel, instructs us that man cannot build his way to heaven. And when he attempts to supplant himself in the place of God, chaos ensues, right? It's attempting to construct the ultimate order leads to the ultimate chaos. In the realm of augury, what this means is the scientific detail and breakdown of intestines and veins and knowing where everything is and laying it out and drawing it out on a map. That is a sin. It is attempt to reconstruct the Tower of Babel. And what real augurs need to do, we need to get back to, is none of this scientific crap, which is actually something I genuinely believe, just pure intuition. We need just people who have their cow. None of the scientific study. If you get if an FDA inspector gets a diseased cow in front of him, I don't want him to do any scientific tests. I want him to tear open the guts with his bare hands and then just sense the disease inside.
Yeah, see, Dune, this is exactly what I was getting towards. We the kind of Gen Z framing would be like vibes based augury. We
Yes.
could work on you could find
Yeah.
something a little more academic.
You're aura farming.
Yeah. And actually, I think we should apply this exact same process to medicine as well. Like you go into the dentist and it's like, hey, yeah, sorry, I'm not going to look at your teeth, but if you want, I will cut open your stomach, rummage around, and see how I feel. And I think that would really dramatically cut down on problems like overcrowding in the ER. I think that there's legs on this idea, is what I'm saying.
I just thought when you were going with the dentist thing, I was going to say, I mean, dentistry really is close to augury because he's just sticking these fingers in your mouth and just like messing you up for like half an hour and going, yeah, your second molar is all fucked up. It's like, thanks, buddy. Like, and I wonder that actually dentistry is a truly sadistic profession as well, because number one, there's some certain demographic and ethnic compositions of dentists that I don't like. And also, they talk to you while their fingers are in your mouth and they're asking you questions about your day and your life. I've had people ask me about relationship advice, or not a relationship advice, but trying to like get stuff out of me. And
Give you about relationship.
yeah, and like this guy's got his fist in my mouth, like.
Well,
and they expect you to answer. It's cruel and unusual. And, dentistry is a terrible practice that,
You know who were meticulous about dental hygiene? The Romans.
Yeah, well, pre-Christian Rome was a depraved and degenerate place. We talk about this a lot on the podcast. I don't, pre-Christian Rome, they had dentists and they also sent Christians to die in the Colosseum.
Well, okay. So the reason why the Romans had better teeth is because of electromagnetism. So go
on.
So, one of the big issues with modern science is that it tells us there are 5 senses. This is just clearly incorrect. There's 6 senses.
Were you going to say demonic?
No. Well, no, I wouldn't go that far. I think it's just merely this part of science is not necessarily demonic. It's just incorrect. We have 6 senses. We have electromagnetism as a sense, which sounds very woo-woo, but it's not, because everything with an electrical charge generates an electrical field. You as a human being generate an electrical field, right? So what happens is that your teeth are very, very close to your nerves, right? They're right up against them. My parents are physicians, so you can trust me. All my knowledge on this is accurate. So what happens with modern dentistry is because you're constantly blasted with ionizing radiation when you go in, it's slowly, and just walking throughout your day, because there's so much more electromagnetic radiation, is the nerves which are closer to the skin, especially in your mouth, right, where they are the closest, they slowly start to generate and degrade. So teeth in the modern era in a first world society tend to degenerate faster because of this electromagnetic interference with the nervous system. The Romans obviously do not have this, and also they had toothbrushes, so they actually have pretty good teeth, which is why when you go back, I'm being completely serious about this too, which is why when you go back and you look at Roman teeth, they actually look like pretty good. Like we have it, there's not like they didn't have a need to invent braces or like other shit like we dentistry stuff. Yeah, they just had they did have dentures.
They had dentures?
Yeah, they did. They used like teeth and stuff like George Washington. But
didn't George Washington's dentures have like lead in them or something like that?
It was slave teeth. No, not elephant. Some other animal. Jay, you're the history guy.
I think it was horse, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was horse teeth. Yeah,
or maybe it was a hippopotamus. I can't remember.
Yeah, some weird African animal. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I realized I don't really know enough about either dentistry or history to continue that line of questioning.
Yeah, hit us with another question.
I had this whole gimmick planned out to give you guys fun facts about different other places named Rome and have you guess. But the problem is there's really only like 2. And after that, it just gets to like really granular, specific details about like Rome, Georgia that just are not at all amusing.
Well, hit us with it. I'm still interested.
Well, see, the point is, I was going to make you guess which Rome is it.
There's a few Romes
So-
around.
I know there's several. But to go back to the previous point, actually, that's sort of one of the other kind of like facets of like modern conversation about history I think is really interesting, which is this like, and people call it different things. Like I think was it Chesterton who coined the term presentism, or Lewis, I can't remember which, right? Which is this idea that like everyone before like 1964 was comedically retarded and evil. And I remember watching this like documentary in like grade school or whatever about Romans. And it was basically talking about how like the optimal, like there's, according to this stupid documentary, right? It was all about like Romans drinking piss to keep their teeth from rotting out. And I remember even at like age like whatever, 7 or 8, I was like, I'm gonna be honest, dude, that seems kind of fake. Like I'm gonna be honest, I feel like that's probably not true. Do you know what I'm talking about? This sort of like comedic need to make the past like almost like over the top in the way that it's like horrible. And
Caligula making his horse senator, or
did that not happen?
It, from what I remember, and it's been a minute since I looked into it.
I'll be really disappointed if it didn't.
No, it happens. So it's not crazy though, because basically what happens is it's a vote in this. It's not, because it's a vote in the Senate to engage in a military campaign. I think it's in Dacia. It's somewhere in Eastern Europe. And basically he doesn't have the votes for it. And this is a little bit earlier on in his reign, so everyone's willing to sort of oppose him. And what he does is he's like one vote shy of, actually, he doesn't actually need the Senate's confirmation, but just for looks. So what he does is he appoints his horse as a senator so that he can get the final vote. The issue is the horse neighs, right? Who can translate a horse's neigh? Well, of course, Caligula can translate the horse's neigh, so he votes with them. So it's not a crazy thing. It's a little bit weird.
Yeah, but it's, how it's played off. That's what I'm kind of more going.
Yeah.
It's played off in the same kind of like, the Caligula put a horse in the Senate because he was crazy, and it's like, well, he was less like crazy and more just a sadist.
Well, I mean, it's also like I have very, very great sympathy for Caligula, because especially, and you do get a lot of people in history who do really evil, really insane shit. But the issue with the modern history, kind of like you were saying, Jay, is people will look back and just see that part. What people don't or forget to mention is the fact that Caligula is basically raped daily from the time he's a child by Tiberius. And this is on the Isle of Capri, he watches many people get raped and murdered from him. He himself is raped dozens, hundreds of times. And then you get this guy, and everyone's like, "Oh, look at this crazy emperor guy." It's like
we can say rape on the Jay Burden show, right? We can say rape.
I mean, I'm not going to be bothered to edit it out, so yes, you can.
Well,
right.
Yeah, but I mean, like that figure, and then you're like, okay, well, look at Tiberius. Well, Tiberius was raised in the time where all the other people who are supposed to be emperor die, and so he just kind of ends up there. He hates it. He hates dealing with people this whole time. And not to mention that all his closest ally, like his mother's batshit insane. All of his closest friends are dead. And it's just him against this group of senators who are hostile against him because he's, like he's the second emperor and not really sure if things are going to go this way. So it drives him insane. And then he becomes a sadistic child rapist. But, there's a story behind why these people become evil, and just painting them as the ultimate Hitlerish evil it's nonsense, and I think it does a disservice to the evils that these people actually suffered.
Well, and I think that's another interesting point. You guys have mentioned the need for people like King George to sort of serve as these like satanic figures, and I think one of the most interesting points to discuss when these sort of satanic figures arise is the like, and then for no reason at all, he went literally insane.
Yeah.
Like that is the narrative which justifies their evil. It's not like there was a predicate. It is simply, he was evil and crazy and horrible, and there's nothing about him that makes any sense.
Yeah, because
and obviously there isn't.
You can't humanize in a founding myth, the evil guy cannot be humanized at all because he is literally meant just as a device to further the goals of the nation's founding, and or the other kind of whatever else is being justified. So yeah, you're right. You can't humanize. And it is very funny that in the kind of libtard frame of historiography, there is an attempt to humanize everyone except for bad people. Well, except for people they deem bad. They'll try to humanize Nero, which I do think they do a decent job with. They try to humanize, just about anyone and everyone. But if they provide a useful tool to further the libtard narrative, they will not be humanized, which is a very obvious thing to say. I sound like James Lindsay here. The woke in 200 AD. But I think it's a thing to just keep in mind when you're reading a lot of history, especially modern history, because most of it is done by libtards, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of interesting to see, those sort of ideological priors sort of echo through, because even if there is sort of no moment where the mask slips and there's something that is, I guess you could say like explicitly political said, you almost see it in the framing itself, right? Where it's like, there's no point where it's like, this person was bad because they were, the Donald Trump of the 3rd century. Like, it's never that cartoonish.
No, but you see
the same sort of like ideological framing. Sorry, Titus, I'll throw it back to you.
No, you're exactly right there. You'll never see. Well, I shouldn't say that because a lot of times you will nowadays, but you won't see as much of the ideological framing. But one of the examples of libtard framing is overanalyzing romantic and sexual relationships of historical rulers. Even beyond the this person was secretly gay or whatever thing. Which one of my more hot takes on that is I'm more than willing to believe X Roman emperor was gay or transgender because most of those Roman emperors were terrible degenerates. I'm more than willing to I think that there does not need to be a knee-jerk reaction to go, actually, no, Elagabalus was not transgender. Yeah, Elagabalus was transgender. Elagabalus was also awful and mentally unwell. Exactly. But
yeah, it's like, do you really want to own that one?
Yeah, but they do. That's kind of the weird thing is that they do.
Well, and I think that it's also, and this is always the case with history and literature, that there is sort of a stated and revealed purpose of any work, where it's like, well, obviously this is technically a book or a narrative around X event, but it is sort of touched by like the spirit of the age. And it's interesting, a lot of the discussion around the kind of like sexual proclivities of different historic figures. And you see this even up into modern history, the most recent, Napoleon movie is sort of an example of this.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about the one where it's Abraham Lincoln is gay, and I was like, yes, Abraham Lincoln was gay. Tom D. my Di Lorenzo book sitting there, real Lincoln vindicated.
Look, regardless of the historical fact, Lincoln was gay in a derogatory sense, even if he is not in a literal sense.
I think he was also gay in a literal sense.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a point to be made, but to Napoleon, right, where the whole focus of that film is effectively on this, like, bizarre, humiliating series of relationships, where it seems like this sort of desire to counter the idea of kind of heroic transcendence, the idea that someone could be more than just, a weird sex pervert, and deep down everyone is that. And, obviously, we've always had sex perverts and we always will. But I do think it's interesting, this idea to sort of deliberately miss the point. Because look, like, people aren't interested in, Alexander the Great because of his sexual history. Like, people dig into it because he is otherwise notable. But it's sort of this idea to kind of pull everything into the kind of like mundane, if you see what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, I will push back slightly and say there are some people that are interested in Alexander the Great for his sexual proclivities, and those are.
Well,
But let me
true, but I mean that's not why he is a notable figure.
No, but it is. But it is a wider symptom of what happens when you let women and gay people who are also women, in any position, and eunuchs of any sort, whether it be transgender or not, into any sort of position of influence. One of the big rules that Dune and I have on Duo Stulti that you learn from history is never, ever, ever let women or eunuchs run anything. And because gay people are women, it's another great example of that kind of thing. It's just taking over, and we're going to make this historical figure all about these weird sexual proclivities because that's all I can think about, because I just finished the latest book of I Got Impregnated by a Minotaur, and I need to go and now all of a sudden Alexander the Great had, sex with his male best friend or whatever, which I don't know, Dune, what's your take on the Alexander Hephaestion thing?
I hate all of it. I hate talking about it. I hate the idea. It's just, I don't care. And it's irrelevant to the story. Okay, so they're out on campaign. There's not women around. These two dudes, both of whom are Greek, have sex with each other. It's like, okay, am I supposed to all right, that's a revolutionary historical thing. Wow, I'm so great that we're spending books and books discussing who this guy screwed and not the sheer luck he had or the any capability he had militarily. Yeah, let's focus on who he should. It's just some of the time this stuff is important. Some of the time who people sleep with is important in history. For example, Elagabalus, it's actually important because the reason he ends up murdered is because everyone's this. Sorry, I had to self-censor there. This guy is running around asking the guards to have sex with him, and he wants to cut off his penis to make a vagina. It's important that we have that information so we know why he dies. But yeah, for things like Alexander, it's just it really does anger me because I don't want to talk about it because it's irrelevant. It's kind of gross. I don't particularly in my day-to-day life, and I'm super interested in who my other friends are sleeping with. I'm utterly uninterested and annoyed at the emphasis on this kind of crap to the point where I think I've developed a good enough sense. Whenever I put on a historical documentary, you can usually tell in a minute or two, all right, is there going to be a whole 20-minute section about them secretly being gay? So yeah, I hate all this crap.
And it just shows, it kind of ties in with what we were talking about, what Jay, you're saying with the comedically bad angle. It's just this kind of infantilizing juvenilization of, that's not really a word, but it's going to be a word today, of history. I don't think a lot of these people that claim to like history a lot actually want to engage with history. They have their own weird perversions and stuff like that and want to map that onto history. And they also think it's like George R. R. Martin. As much as I love A Song of Ice and Fire, it's this kind of everything's gray, everything's, very morally degenerate.
Ooh, I can tie this back to history. Yeah, so this is exactly what this is. So in Edward Gibbon, when he's writing The Decline and Fall, there's a very big debate in the history community whether or not God is responsible for everything in this is a Protestant argument, but whether or not God is responsible for everything in history in a sort of Presbyterian Calvinistic sense that everything's predetermined, or whether or not human being agency, have free will and actually affect history. This is a really big deal to the point where Gibbon actually leaves England because so many of the people there are like, yeah, God's in control of everything. And Gibbon, when he's writing Decline and Fall, he's like, well, I can't just say that. I have to actually explain what's going on. And in all the other history books about Rome at the time, they basically say the bad things that happen to Rome are because of God's providence. The good things are because of God's providence. And it's just this unnecessary insistence on repeatedly bringing up the divine to explain events. Whereas if you're a Christian, you can believe that, but if you're writing a history book, you don't need to include it in every bloody paragraph. So Gibbon's, what he's doing in Decline and Fall is very much trying to get away from that. I think that today, that's what a lot of the backfitting or like the modern weird perversions onto history is it's a very temporal thing that's going to go away. Then 200 years we're going to look, if we're around, 200 years we're going to look back on and say, oh yeah, they had a very strange historiography for about 60, 80 years.
Yeah, but will it actually
useless.
go away? Gibbon's historiography with the Roman Empire has endured, and whether or not
That's my point. Gibbon was the good guy there. He was fighting against the modern. I might not have articulated that super well, but Gibbon was fighting against the contemporary conception of historiography of the time of God as the sole mover of history, which is something I believe as a Presbyterian. But like I was saying, you don't need to write that in every history book.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something to that. I'm always sort of interested in, as you've said, right, the sort of the degree to which you sort of can't ever get out of like your own kind of like cultural waters, right? You can never fully, kind of remove yourself from that. So I'm curious, and maybe this is an overly vague question, but when you are reading sort of primary sources, obviously you have kind of a number of different translations. Do you find yourself drawn to, one certain era? Because obviously this is sort of something I'm only aware of distantly, but I follow enough classicists to understand that there's sort of a running gun battle being waged in the translation of primary sources to sort of conform them with modern sensibilities. So one, I guess, do you have any particularly translators you enjoy? And then is there a particular pattern? Like, are you a fan of the Victorians or older or newer than that?
Yes. Give me 1 second. I'll go get my translator.
Yeah. So while Dune's grabbing stuff, I can kind of give my take on this, which is one, I find whatever is easiest for me to find online for free or what's cheapest on Amazon when I'm buying a book. That's my fast and dirty answer. But I also think that the bigger answer is that it depends on the text. It depends on, is this something that is going to have a heavy historical, is this going to have socio-political ramifications, right? The Iliad and the Odyssey, that's a good example, right? There's a whole uproar over the latest translation of the Iliad and the Odyssey because they're terrible. They're like millennial slop libtard language. And that's not how Homer's meant to be read. So in things like that, it's much more important. But I do think that sometimes, like, for example, the book I've got from Michael Sellos, like talking about Byzantine emperors, I don't really think that there's a libtard that's going to fuck with that translation as much. So I don't think that I think that one's only been translated like twice. So Dune.
Okay, so there's different answers for different parts of history and different translations. So if you're looking for things from the Greco-Romans, a period of about 1850 to roughly the end of the First World War, those are by far and away the best of the Greco-Roman translations because they're mostly translated by Brits, and they're mostly translated by Brits who are learning Greek and Latin in growing up through school at the time, which is actually good. So those are really, really good for hard history, like the things you would find in Loeb Classical. If you're looking at ecclesiastical stuff, like I was saying earlier, the period from about like 1650 to 1850, it is in this. There's this big debate in the historiographic community about whether or not you write that God is continually the first mover of everything or humans have agencies. That era is really good for ecclesiastical history because everyone's arguing over church stuff. And so they want to be very accurate in their translation. So like, for example, the book I just read and got is my translation of Josephus, and it's from the 1680s by a guy, William Whiston. So I really like that. If you're going for hard history, I would stick with the late 1800s. If you're going for ecclesiastical stuff, 1650 to 1850. And yeah, I mean, that's generally what I stick to. Like Titus said, sometimes you just got to go online. Like there's no way I'm buying all 20-some books of Pliny's natural history until I actually have the money to do so, or so my wife tells me. But yeah, like I think that's a good general breakdown, although there are specific texts like the Odyssey that I don't have it with me, but there's like specific authors you could go from. And I actually like the Fagel's translation of stuff, but I know a lot of kind of people in our sphere stray away from those.
I don't know enough about it to really give an educated opinion. I'm the layman when it comes to this stuff.
Well, guys, it was a ton of fun having you on. I'll have to have you back on again soon. I am not firing on all cylinders today. Just a little under the weather. But it was a ton of fun to have you guys here. Where can people find you? Where can they find the podcast?
You can find the podcast on all of your various audio podcatchers, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, There's a bunch of different ones. And if it's not, we're going to make a Twitter handle for it. It's Duo Stulti. Duo Stulti is the podcast name. We're going to make a Twitter for it. I'm going to have to do that today. But you can go follow Dune on Twitter at Doomer Insights, and then
what can I follow you on Twitter at?
don't follow me on Twitter. And if you're going to follow me on Twitter,
thanks for having us, Ajay. Good fun.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for having for making time, even with my somewhat poor scheduling. It's great talking to you guys. Thanks.
Great talking with you.